All right, let's see what we can dig up today. Oh no, Gene Ludwig, man, he's a jazz icon, man. Oh, let's see the managing editor of All About Jazz. Let's see what he had to say. Tradition and handing down of customs, beliefs, and stories from generation to generation runs especially strong among jazz organists. Hmm. They are a select crew, after all, piloting jazz, Spruce Goose, the technically marvelous Hammond B3 organ through the turbulence of time and popular taste. It's no easy feat, of course, coordinating hands and feet, keys and pedals with mind and spirit. It's no secret either that, when done right, the Hammond B soars like nothing else. It twists and turns, jives and grooves, speak, communicate, and resonate with you. Academics call this soul jazz. Fans call it good music. Gene Ludwig calls it a career, a life's work. Playing organ since 1958, Ludwig's craft is an ongoing admiration of masters who came before, of traditions, of truth. Explaining it with words gets academic and dry. We'll let Gene explain it. Let him take us on the ride.
Hi, thank you for tuning in. You know, my guest really needs no introduction. He is known all over the world for his masterful Hammond B3 organ playing. It brings me great pleasure to bring to you the one and only Gene Ludwig. Gene, how you doing?
I'm doing fine, Tim. How are you?
I'm doing pretty good. I want to thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to stop by and talk to us.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, it's a pleasure.
All right.
Okay, now let's go on the ride. We're going to go all the way back to the beginning.
All right.
Where were you born?
I was born in Twin Rocks, Pennsylvania.
Okay.
It's a coal mining town, maybe 20 miles north of Johnstown.
Mm-hmm.
My dad worked in the mines, and he came to Pittsburgh and when the war broke out, and that's when I moved the family to Pittsburgh.
Okay,
You know.
okay. So how old were you when you left there?
I was about 4 years old.
Oh, you was about 4 years old.
Yeah.
So do you remember your time there though at
Oh
all?
yeah,
What
yeah.
what was it like for you growing up until four at there?
Well, at that time we were just, like we were in the midst of the depression, and
Okay.
times were tough, really, really tough. But I had two older brothers, and they were going to elementary school up there, and it was a very, very small town, and the mining was a big thing up there, and that's how everybody made their living.
Yeah, yeah. So you left there and you moved to Swissville?
Well, we moved to Wilkinsburg, and then
Okay.
from Wilkinsburg, my dad bought the house in Swissville,
Yeah.
and that's where I really grew up in
That's where you really
Swissville.
grew up in Swissville. But what was it like for you growing up in Swissville?
Oh, it was wonderful. Uh, it was how can I say, a cross between all types of individuals, all kinds of workers. We had blue collar workers, we had white collar workers, and it was wonderful. The school system there was very good, and I had a good time growing up as far as a high school. It was Swissville High. I graduated,
Okay.
and it was great.
Yeah. Okay. Now, as a kid in Swissville, what did you do for fun, man? What kind of stuff did you do?
Well, we just, I guess, as every other youngster would do, is I had baseball and
Baseball, huh?
and football, and we had our bikes. We'd ride all over the all over the town. We'd get right into Wilkinsburg and Edgewood, and Point Breeze on our bikes, and
Okay.
that was outing, and. When my dad bought the house, the people that we bought it off left the piano there, and that's how I got started.
Oh, that's what I was going to ask you. I was going to ask you because people all over the world know you for your Hammond B3 organ playing.
Right.
But that wasn't your first instrument, correct?
No, piano was.
Piano was. And so tell me, how did you actually get introduced to the piano again? You said that.
Well, actually, during the war years, the big bands were very popular, and we had no television back then, of course. We had radio, and I was listening to Harry James and Tommy Dorsey and Glenn Miller. And I would sit down to the piano. I was like 4 or 5 years old and pick out ditties, what I heard on the air, And then my mother decided to give me piano lessons, which I started with first grade in 1943.
Okay. Well, let me ask you this. I mean, what was it about that piano in the house that gravitated you over there? I mean, it made you, some kids, all kids that have pianos in the house don't go over and start working on them,
Well,
but you did.
That's a good question, because I really never gave that much thought. It just lured me in, and
Yeah.
I just went over and I liked the sound of the instrument, although it was horribly out of tune. And I'd sit down and pick it, and my mother said to my father, "Listen to Gene, what he's doing. Let's give him a few lessons, see what happens."
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask you. Do you remember the first time that you walked over to that piano and struck the key? Do you remember that moment for you?
Really, I can't.
You don't remember that
recollect-
moment?
No, I can't recollect that.
Okay.
But it was just maybe the music that was inside me just brought everything out, and I just sat down and tried it,
Yeah. And so your mom said, "Hey, get some music, some piano lessons."
Let's get some lessons, right?
Okay. Now with piano lessons, obviously you had to practice. Right?
Oh, of course.
Oh, so how often did you practice?
Maybe once a day. I'd put
Oh,
in
every
maybe
day,
a
huh?
half hour to an hour, but sometimes I'd like to go out and play ball.
Okay.
And my mother would have to take a stick to get me to practice, and she would sit down with me to get me to practice. She'd leave her household chores, go, and she said, "I'm going to sit with you while you practice, make sure you get your practice in." So it just evolved.
Yeah. So the whole practice thing, how was that? I mean, was that enjoyable for you, or was it like, oh, I got to go practice again, or was you more or less eager to sit down and do it?
No, it was a chore. It was a
At that
chore.
age, at that stage, it was a chore.
Yeah, right.
That's cool. Now, did you play in school?
Yes, in high school I played. We had junior high. We had a dance band.
In junior high.
Yeah.
Not in elementary. You didn't do any playing.
No, I made my first piano recital in I think 1944, And that was, my piano teacher would get all the students together once a year at the Mifflin Avenue Methodist Church in Wilkinsburg. And we would, all of us would sit down and play our piece, you know.
Yeah.
And that was my primary exposure as far as playing in front of an audience.
Was that the first time that
Yeah,
you played in
yeah,
front of?
yeah.
Well, what did that do for you? I mean,
I was
butterflies.
scared. But I was scared.
Is that right?
Absolutely, absolutely. And then as time went on, you know, I got little more acclimated because, you know, every time we would go to visit my grandfather and my grandmother, they had a piano in the parlor, you know, and they'd insist that I sit down and play. So the whole family, there was 11 of my dad's family,
Oh,
and almost every Sunday we'd have quite a few of the get-togethers with the family, and they said, "Come on, Gene, you got to play." So I sort of got acclimated to playing in front of people.
Yeah. Now you mentioned some of the music you were listening to at that time. Did that inspire you? Did you try to mimic those keyboard players that you were hearing? Or?
I was the melodies of the tune, like the Andrews Sisters, you know. And Glenn Miller, and they had their tunes that they did, their signature tunes, and I would sit down and I'd pick out the melody of the tunes that I heard, you know, and that's the way it got started.
Yeah, so you had an ear for that way from the beginning.
Yeah,
huh?
From the beginning I had an ear. Yeah.
So when you said when you got into high school, you got into an ensemble.
Well, no, we had junior high. We had like a 12 or 13-piece band. It was like a lab band, what I call a lab. And we got all the students together, and the musical director, the band director, would have the band, the orchestra together, and we'd have our parts that we played. And by that time, I had maybe 6 or 7 years of piano instruction, and my sight reading was fairly decent.
I was going to ask you that.
So I would sit down and play the charts, you know, and we had the conventional bass, piano, and drums, and a horn section, a trombone section, you know, and a trumpet section. But they were stock arrangements, nothing hard about them. But that's where I really got my, as far as working with other musicians, I've got my start.
Yeah. Now, up until high school, did you do any recording?
No, none at all.
None at all? Okay, well, when we come back, you went to college.
Yeah, for a couple of years.
Yeah, let's talk about your college years when we come back, okay?
All right.
We'll be back. Mr. Gene Ludwig, up close and personal. For those of you just joining us, you are missing it. We're here with the one and only Mr. Gene Ludwig. Now, Gene, let's talk about you did 2 years at Edinburgh State Teachers College.
Right.
What was that like for you?
Well, I didn't, you know, after I graduated from high school, I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life, you know, and I was born with, you know, a lot of rhythm in my body, you know, so I decided to go to Edinburgh and take drum lessons of all things, you know. They didn't offer a music curriculum up there. So I majored in physical science, and minored in mathematics. I was going to be a physics teacher. And prior to that, I had gotten brochures. I had considered being an undertaker too. So,
Okay.
and when I got to Edinburgh, you know, I took drum lessons. I played in the marching band for 2 years up
Out of
there.
here.
And that was it as far as the school. And the schooling got me involved in civil engineering.
Yeah.
You know, and well, that's later on down the line.
Okay, but the marching band, what was that like for you? I mean, did you actually march in parades and stuff like that?
It was football games.
But
and
what was
things
your,
like that.
what did you play? Snare drum, bass
No,
drum?
no. Well, we had what they call it. It looks like a regular drummer. It looks like a how can I say, a floor tom.
Okay.
And you had a strap on your neck. And
Yeah.
but when I high step, you know, that drum would come down and beat me on, hit me on. And I had these what they called, I don't even know what they're called anymore as far as the sticks. I think they're 3Bs, you know, they're
Okay.
like baseball
Yeah,
bats.
look like
you know.
baseball bats.
And that's what we used, you know, in school. you know.
Yeah, yeah. That's interesting. Now, well, when did you decide that this, what you're doing, would be your life's work?
Well, I don't know. I had a very big interest in music, and when I came out of school, I had a chance to meet one of the greatest organists that ever walked this earth, Jimmy Smith.
Jimmy Smith.
At the Hurricane.
Wow.
And up in the hill, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And I just fell in love with the sound of the instrument. Although I had been a big fan in high school of Bill Doggett and Bill Davis and Buddy Cole. I just liked the sound of the instrument. And then after I heard Jimmy play, and I said, wow, that's what I want, you know.
Yeah.
That's what I want out of life. So, like, I got into a couple jobs as a civil engineer where I could make a living, you know. And in 1958, I bought my first Hammond. And 59, matter of fact, November 59, I was working on Gateway 4 downtown. I was one of the engineers on that building.
Okay.
And when that building finished up, they laid me off.
Oh, wow.
And right after that, I was shaving one morning and I flipped a coin. And I was like 22 years old. And I looked in the mirror and I said, well, Gene, what do you want to do with your life? Do you want to be an engineer? Because they called me back to work to go on another project.
Okay.
Or do you want to be a full-time musician? At that time, everybody was working. I mean, being a musician was the ultimate goal in life as far as being a professional, you know, and making a stab at making your living at it. So it came out my favor as far as being a musician.
Yeah.
And that I haven't looked back since.
Yeah, I'd say.
And for the last this month or November marks 50 years I've made my complete living
50 years.
playing in nightclubs.
Remarkable.
Yeah.
Yeah,
50
that's
years.
remarkable. Now, let me ask you this. Do you remember the first time that you actually touched a Hammond B3? You know, and heard that sound, I mean, actually from your fingers struck in the key. And do you remember that moment?
Oh, yes. Yeah, so there's a friend of mine, George Hyde. His father had a recording studio down in, let's see, it's a William Penn Hotel. It was a William Penn. It was up on, I think, the 17th floor, and he rented Hammonds.
Oh.
So I went up there, and, you know, with George, we were just kids then, you know, and he had this Hammond organ sitting there, and I said, "Oh, can I try this?" You know, because I had all these years of experience on piano, and I sat down and I said, "Wow, this is it!" You know, and that was a very, very, very big thrill for me
That's
to
a
sit
beautiful
down.
thing.
You know.
Now, from 1943 to 1955, you took formal training on the piano, correct?
Right.
Now, something happened in 1957 that changed your life, and like you said, that was when you met Jimmy Smith.
Jimmy Smith, right.
Yeah. Now, when we come back, will you tell us about your first jazz organ combo
Okay.
and your first gig with your newfound love?
No problem.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Gene Ludwig, up close and personal. For those of you just joining us, we're here with jazz icon, Mr. Gene Ludwig. Now, Gene, your first organ combo was led by Sonny Stanton. Now, what was that like?
Well, it was primarily jazz R&B, but very, very heavy on the R&B side. And I'll never forget, he had a big Conn Rhapsody organ. It wasn't a Hammond, it was a Conn. And I mean, you had to put so much effort into playing that instrument that it was tiring. But after maybe 3 or 4 months playing that instrument, I talked him into buying a Hammond. But we started around Pittsburgh at a place called Mason's. That was on Wiley Avenue, right across the street from the Crawford Grill. And we stayed there for a hot minute. And then we worked on the north side for Fred Ferris at the hi-hat. It was on Pennsylvania Avenue.
Okay.
You know? And we traveled some. We went into Youngstown, Ohio, and we stayed at this the Ritz Bar on Wilson Avenue. We were there for almost a year, every night of the week, you know. And then I decided I wanted to move on, and that's when I went with another group. We traveled extensively. We went to Chicago and Indianapolis and Cleveland. And I decided after working with them for a couple of years, I want to form my own trio. So me and the drummer that had been working with this group, Randy Gillespie, we decided we're going to get a guitar player and start our own thing. So that's what I did. That's when Jerry Bird came on board with us, and that was in 1962. So that's, we started that trio then.
Yeah, and is that when you was carrying your Hammond B3 with you?
Oh, I had my Hammond. Oh, yeah. Yeah, I had. Actually, I had a Hammond C3 that I had bought at Gimbel Brothers.
What's the difference?
Well, the C3 and the B3, it's the same as far as the mechanics go. It's the same thing, only a different cabinet. It's the church model is a solid cabinet, where the B3 is like it has legs on it, you know, and they're about the same as far as weight. I think that C is a little more heavier than the. A little heavier than the B.
Let's talk about the cabinet now. If correct me if I'm wrong, is that a Leslie speaker?
Well, the Leslie
with
speaker
the rotating
is another piece to the ensemble. You know, you have a Hammond, you have the organ or the console, we call it. You have the bench and the pedals, and then you have the cable leading out of the console to your speaker. And that is the Leslie. Is the speaker.
Yeah, and it had a rotating speaker.
Right. They developed that back in 1934. For Hammond, you know, and they stuck with it all these years. But they were two different identities, though, because Leslie made speakers for all the organs, you know, Gull Branson and Conn, because when I played that Conn, he had Leslie on it, but the engineering on it was much different than for Hammond.
Yeah. No, I know. I mean, I've been listening to you for decades, and your fingers and all that. But how did you get your feet in there on the pedals and stuff like that? I mean, was that easy for you to do when you started?
It was fairly easy.
Was
you know, like Jimmy Smith told me a story one time that when he first got his organ, he had it in a warehouse in Philadelphia, and he put the pedals, and he put a chart of the pedals up above the organ, and he said he would take his lunch and just sit there and stare at those pedals, you know, the chart, you know, what am I going to do with this, you know, and then you sort of practice, and you get the feel for the pedals, you know, and a lot of organists use like a heel toe method, but I use 1 foot, you know, and most of the players, we use what we call a left-hand bass. We play the bottom manual, the bass line on the bottom manual, and we play the pedals right with the hand, you know, and it gives you a nice bass punch, you know.
So that whole thing was pretty easy for you.
For me, it wasn't too hard.
Oh, that's cool. That's cool. Now, look, back in 1962, the most important thing for players like yourself was to be able to play rooms like the Hurricane and stay within the pack of jazz organists.
Right.
That whole era right there. I mean, what was it like back then? I mean, playing those rooms, man, with your
Well,
organ, and what was the crowds like? I mean, it seemed
oh,
like to me that they were extremely receptive.
very receptive. The jazz society today that we live in today is much different than that was back then. People were back then were in a partying mood all the time, and it was a happy, that's why you could go into like the Hurricane on a Monday or Tuesday night, the place be jammed, yeah.
That's great. That's great. Now, Billy Driscoll, if hopefully I'm pronouncing his name
Right.
right, became your manager.
Right.
Okay. Well, how did that all come about?
Well, there was a record company here, Levere Records, and he had been Dinah Washington's road manager.
Whoa.
And he came back home and he heard me play, and because I had done some recording down at the studio, and he happened to be there, and he says, "Kid, you sound pretty good, and maybe we can do something." So he started traveling with me, and got me in with Neswi Erdogan and Ahmed Erdogan at Atlantic Records. That was my first major label.
Is that right?
In 1963, right. And he got me with Ruth Bowen, Queen Booking. Dinah Washington had her own booking agency, Queen Booking.
I didn't
And
know
Ruth was president. Ruth was Dinah's partner, more or less, And she got me into so many great venues, Count Basie's up in New York, had a room up in Harlem, and I went up there, and the funny thing, it was my first New York engagement. And as a trio, we went in there, and I think I had a week with an option. Everybody had an option, like if you did good, they would pick up your options. So I got the call at the hotel the next day. Ruth called me. She says, Basie picked up your option. So I was there for 2 weeks, and I'm trying to compare Basie's with the room here in Pittsburgh. It was like if you remember the balcony.
Balcony,
okay,
yeah.
That's where everybody, you would walk in there any given night, you'd see how many different musicians just hanging, But Basie's, they were hanging, but there was the names. Like Kenny Burrell would be at the bar almost every night, I met Miles.
Get out of here.
There, J.J. Johnson, Grant Green, and Macduff would come in all the another organist, he'd come in all the time, and if they weren't working, Lou Donaldson, it was fantastic. It was just the aura of the place.
Did you ever just sit there and say, I can't believe this is happening?
That's right. I did at times.
And they coming in here to see you,
I did
man.
And then if we're in that area and we're in another room, maybe we play in Jersey and we had a night off, I'd always go up to Basie's, and I saw Wes Montgomery and Mel Ryan up there. And I saw Illinois Jacquette, Groove Holmes. That's the caliber of musicians that we were competing with to in our circuit.
Just think, man, all this from the piano lessons your mom man, got you. So you parents, hey, you got to put them in your children young, man. You see what happened.
Right.
Now, Atlantic Records, the first time you did a recording session, you remember what that was? The first time you seen a recording studio and did it?
Well, no, I had recorded here in Pittsburgh at Levere Records, and we put out 145.
Okay.
And that was like a stepping stone, and we went into, I've been doing this tune, it was a crowd pleaser, Sticks and Stones, Ray Charles. And it was a crowd pleaser, and so Billy decided he's going to call Ruth and see if there's anybody that she could put us in contact with. So she put us in contact with Neswi Erdogan, the Atlantic Records. And he brought a party over. I was at the front room in Newark, New Jersey. And they came across the river and, sat down and listened to us, a whole set. We played the tune for him, And thank God that night, it was during the week, but the place was buzzing. It was jumping,
Yeah.
And he said, "Oh yeah," he said, "we can do something with this." So he signed me.
Right.
And we went into the recording studio. We were in his studio. They had their own studios, and we went in and recorded, and I looked around and I said, oh my God, Aretha Franklin recorded here, Ray Charles,
Yeah.
and all these great artists, you know. And here I am,
Right.
right in the midst of it. You know.
Yeah.
I came off we were coming off the elevator one time, and Sonny and Cher, you know, just their kids, you know, they were getting on the elevator, and she bumped up. She said, "Oh, excuse me," you know, and they were with Atco, which is a subsidiary of Atlantic. You know.
Okay. That's great, man. That's exciting, boy, I tell you. Now, look here, when we come back, let's talk about your recordings, because you've made many, many recordings. So let's talk about some when we come back,
Sure.
okay? Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Gene Ludwig, up close and personal. We're here talking to the legendary jazz organist, Mr. Gene Ludwig. And we're going to talk about some of your recordings, because you made a lot of recordings. You did mention your first recording, which was,
Well,
you did in Pittsburgh, you said.
yeah, a thing called Mr. Fink.
Mr.
You know,
Fink,
I think I
right.
still have a copy of that.
Is that right?
It got some airplay, but the company was a very small one, and they didn't have the national distribution as the bigger labels did. You know.
Now, was your next recording with Atlantic?
Atlantic, right.
Was your next one? Okay. So how many did you do for Atlantic?
Well, I recorded Atlantic, and I had let's see, a 6-month contract. This is, you know, I've given this a lot of thought, and this may have been a big blunder on my part, not re-signing with him. But we had recorded another tune, cover tune. High Heeled Sneakers was very big back then. You know? So I made an instrumental out of that, and I presented that to Nesbitt. He liked it. So the contract was up, and me and Billy went up to his office, and he said, well, Gene, you signed another contract, we'll release this record. And I said, no. I said, you release a record, then I'll sign. Because the original contract called for 2 45s in like a year's period. And he said, no, that's where we left it. I walked out of that office. And then Billy got me, not too long after that, got me with Time Records. It was mainstream, it was a big jazz label. And Bobby Shad, he came all the way to Atlantic City. I was appearing in Atlantic City to sign us, and I signed with him, and I did my first album with him, and they released 3, me, Maynard Ferguson, and Morgana King. You know,
What?
Then he had a nice roster.
Well,
with that label.
what year are we talking?
That was in 1964.
64.
Yeah.
Yeah. What was the name of the album?
Organ Out Loud.
Organ Out Loud.
Yeah.
1964. Okay, come on, let's come on up. What was the next one?
Well, then I didn't do any more. I came back into Pittsburgh, you know, and me and Billy decided, well, let's do some things on our own. And there was a Klein Logan variety. They had what we called back then a one-stop, where all the shops around Pittsburgh, the jukebox vendors, they would go to these different, Mrs. Stein had one on 5th Avenue and Fenway Records. I mean, there was a lot of record action going on in Pittsburgh. And Itzy Klein had his one stop, and he wanted to form his own label. So I recorded the next album. It's called The Educated Sounds of Gene Ludwig for Klein, for Klein Logan, you know. And matter of fact, I still see his son Travis Klein every so often. We talk about the old times, you know.
Cool, cool. Now, July 1999, back on track.
Well, I did an album in between for Muse Records.
Okay.
1980.
Okay.
And it's Joe Fields sold Muse, and he formed High Note and Savant. You know, you look at that roster; they have everybody, anybody on that label. You know, so he released an album in 1980. I had just come off the road with Arthur Prysock.
Whoa.
And decided that I wanted to, again, do my own thing, you know. And I recorded here in Pittsburgh, and I got the tapes up to him through was a Houston person.
Okay.
And Houston introduced me to Joe, so they released this album, and I didn't do any. And it was like 18 years before my next release.
Yeah.
But back on the track, I did that here in Pittsburgh, as a, you know, as a demo, trying to get some action going, you know, and I recorded right here on the north side.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Audio disc up here on, I think it's next block up.
North Avenue?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
No, it was on North, yeah.
Yeah.
North or Western Avenue.
Okay.
And I sat on that for, maybe 4 years. You know, I didn't do anything with it until I sent it off to Loose Leaf. And a mutual friend of Jack Kreisberg, Randy Caldwell, and he's a guitar player, we're working together, and he knew Jack at this label. So Jack Kreisberg called me and said, I understand you have some material. So I sent it off to him, and they liked it, and so they decided they're going to, that was my first CD.
Okay.
On Loose Leaf.
Yeah.
And that did fairly well, and he said, well, we'll have to go on with more. So I think I've done 5 projects for that label.
Well, let me see if I'm naming some of them. Soul Serenade.
Right, that was my second one.
That was the second one. Groove Organization.
That was, I think that was the third one.
Okay, and the one right behind is Hands On.
Hands On, right.
Yeah.
And most recently, I did a big band album with the Bill Warfield band at Lehigh University in Allentown. And,
Oh, really?
Right, and that was released. That was released on 18th of Vine, but I don't think anything ever came of it because they were sort of had their hands tied between them and Bill Warfield as far as promotion goes. So it ran its course.
Well, what about February 2006, Live in Las Vegas?
Oh, live! That's another mainstream, not mainstream, but that's another Loose Leaf. Jack booked me out at the Blue Note in Vegas. And I went out, me and Patty jumped the plane, we went out, and I met the rest of the trio. Joe Lano is one of the greatest guitar players that you ever want to hear in life, you know, and of course Tommy Check, wonderful drummer. And we went into the club, and they were bringing the organ in, and we was just having a skull session, like a sound check. And Joe said to me, well, what kind of tunes you want to play? And I said, oh, just play some standards, you know, and some bossa novas. And we did the whole week together. Matter of fact, we did a TV show out there while we were together.
Okay.
You know? And that was, Jack acquired the tapes from the club, and that was like a live recording.
Yeah, I got to get my hands on one. Hey, look here, now you mentioned Patty. Now people are probably wondering, who's that, your girlfriend?
Patty is no, my girlfriend. How dare you?
Yeah.
No,
Let's tell them.
That's my wife. Patty's my wife.
You love, they always say behind every good man there's a great woman.
Oh, she's
and
terrific.
I got to agree with that, man.
Yeah, she's in my corner. I tell you.
She's also your manager, correct?
Yeah, more or less. She does a lot of booking.
That's great.
She's very good at it.
That's great, and she's an excellent photographer.
Yeah, she is.
Yeah.
Yes, she is. Yeah. And her demeanor on the phone is second to none. She can sweet talk you on the phone.
Yeah. Good for you.
Well, I'm very fortunate.
Good for her.
Yeah.
Okay, now let me ask you this about when you record and when you play live. Do you play any differently in the studio than you do on stage in front of an audience?
Well, I think in front of an audience it goes smoother. I'm not really putting a lot of thought as far as I hope this is right, this and that, you know. Things that can really get in your way as far as playing, you know, being creative. But that is it, being creative, you know, and I find myself much more creative in front of an audience, you know.
Okay.
I listen to some things that I record live, and everything seems to flow. But then when I sort of lock up a little bit when I get into a recording studio, because I don't know what it is, you do one take, oh, we didn't like that, let's do another take, and I've done multiple takes on tunes, and you wear it out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which one is the take?
Yeah, right, exactly.
Yeah, that's incredible. Now, when you decide, oh, I'm going to do an album, I'm going to do a CD. How do you pick your songs? I mean, or how do you write when you decide
Well,
to compose?
I go back to the audiences that I play for. What gets over? What do I get the most response? What type of music? If I play a lot of blues, do I get a great response on the blues or whatever? And it all depends. How much effort I put into a tune and the response I get. And it works out. It's really uncanny the way it is.
Yeah. So you just kind of like dig back and say, okay, I know this works. I know they like this and they like that.
Right.
Yeah, James Brown did the same thing.
Oh, did he?
One night he fell down, man. A guy came out and threw a towel over him, and the crowd went crazy.
Right.
And the next night he did it again. He said, wow, he went over. Next thing you know, he just turned the towel into a cape. So it's what works.
I'll tell you one thing that's happened to me, maybe other musicians too. You go into, you play a certain tune on a performance, and the people just go ape over, they love it, and you get such a great feeling of it. And you'll go in the next night, and you're playing like a lounge, you'll do the same tune the same way, Nothing.
Is that right?
That's happened. That's happened.
Audiences.
Well, the audiences plus a feeling that you get within,
Yeah.
that's really strange,
Incredible.
Yeah.
Now, look, when we come back, can we talk about the 1994 Newark Jazz Organ Jam?
Sure.
We'll be right back, ladies and gentlemen, with Mr. Gene Ludwig, up close and personal. Talking to jazz icon, Mr. Gene Ludwig. Gene, 1994 Newark Jazz Organ Jam. What was that all about?
Well, I guess the Newark Jazz Society, it's like a festival that goes on maybe 3 or 4 days, and they devote one day to nothing but organ players. So I got the call from the producer, to come up, and I said, well, who's all on the show? So it's myself, Shirley Scott, Jimmy McGriff, Dr. Lonnie Smith.
Okay.
And they were going to have Bill Davis on the show, but something happened. He couldn't make it. They bought a replacement, but Papa John DeFrancisco, Joey's dad, up.
Okay.
So five players. Oh, Hank Marr, God bless his soul, he's gone. But he was on the show with us. There was 5 organists. And everybody had a lot of time, maybe 20 minutes. And then we did our 20 minutes, and then we had the big bash at the end. They had 2 organs up there, and we'd pair off.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Well, I'm gonna tell you, I was reading up on that on the internet, and the guy said that you was almost a little bit late. And he said you walked in, you looked like a school teacher. But he said when you started playing, and I know you're modest, but you basically stole the show. According to this guy,
Yeah.
you blew everybody away. And I said, yeah, I can see that happening.
Oh,
But that was pretty exciting for you, huh?
Well, it was pretty exciting. And a couple years later, they did the same thing again, and this was at the Newark Symphony Hall. Same type of show. There was myself, Charles Erland, and Jimmy McGriff, and Rhoda Scott. She came over from France, from Paris. And they paired us off with like a quintet, and that's when I had a chance to work with David Fathead Newman in that. He worked with me in my ensemble. You know,
Okay.
it was wonderful. You know.
Yeah. So when you go into those situations, do you already have in your mind what you're going to do, or you just get up there
Well,
and just let it flow?
I just get together with the guys, and we have a little skull session. Well, what do you guys want to play? You know, let's play this. Let's play this. Oh, okay. You know, so we get about 4 or 5 tunes. You know, we're allowed. Maybe with 4 players, maybe we're allowed maybe 45 minutes for my show, 45 minutes for Charlie's, you know. And so we had plenty of stretching time. So we came up with the tunes, you know, and I sort of jotted them down, and I would introduce the tunes, introduce the players, you know.
Yeah.
And it went on very smooth.
Oh, any talk of doing that again? You know of?
Well,
Have you heard anything?
I don't know, with the economical thing today, you know, it's
Yeah.
it's rough, you know. It's to get everybody else, you know. And some of the older players, like Shirley's gone, Jack's gone, of course Jimmy McGriff's, he's gone, you know, and some of the players from that era, that's what they were striving for, the players from that
okay.
era, you know.
Yeah.
And today, I don't know. What can I say? There's a lot of young players out there, but
That's what I was going to ask you about. Now, is the torch being passed on, or is this style of playing and the Hammond B3 and all that? Is that going to be carried on? I haven't heard any of the younger generation carrying on that torch.
It's you know, the record companies are coming up short because due to the computers and downloading, so forth and so on, the record industry is in dire straits. I tell you, it's really bad, you know, and they're not recording as much as they did. You know, if you go on a jazz chart now, you'll see they'll have 200 artists, but you'll see how many independent labels. Like if I want to put out a record, I put it out on my own label, and you know, hire a promo man and get the airplay and hope it sells. You know, but the major companies, they're like Blue Note and Verve. They're very picky. You know, and you have as far as the organist goes, you know, they're very choosy. You know, who they record. You know. And the gigs out there are none, man. You know, like, it's not like it was 40, 50 years ago where we hit the circuit, man. We were going like 12, 13 weeks at a clip. I'd come back to Pittsburgh to visit my folks. I'd have a gig. I'd come to the Hurricane, you know, and it was very, very rarely. I was working like 43, 44 weeks out of a year, you know, and traveling, constantly traveling. But it's not like that anymore. You know, it's all festivals, you know, and even the festivals are taking a hit. The JVC festival folded in New York City, a big festival, you know, and they still have the Monterey Jazz Festival out on the West Coast, you know, the Playboy Festival in Los Angeles, but a lot of the festivals are just, you know, they're not making it.
Yeah, yeah. No, but I was just curious about the younger players.
Okay.
Are there any?
Oh yeah, there's
younger players
there's quite a few.
Is there? Because I'm not aware of any. Just like you know, when I was a kid, man, tap dancing was you know, you had tap dancers everywhere. It's like a dying art now.
Oh yeah.
You know,
yeah.
there's not very few. There's not many left. And
well, as far as the younger players, there's Joey DeFrancisco is one, you know, and
okay.
Tony Monaco is another. He's a youngster from. Well, he's not a youngster, but you know, he's a lot younger than I am, and he's sort of carrying the torch. But you know, if there's a venue where these guys can play in the future and are able to record and sell records, that'll keep the jazz the organ thing going. But as far as the organ, it's the whole 9 yards is the jazz in itself, like trumpets and trombones and saxophones. Like there's quite a few tenor players out here that are great saxophone players. And they're being recorded. But what does the future hold? That's the big question. What does the future hold?
That was my next question.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, looking back on all of it all, and look at the way where music has gone to. What do you think about the way music
That's a
is
hard
going?
question. I'll tell you. Like what I hear on the air today and what I see on TV. Oh boy, it makes me wonder. Like what where are people's tastes going to?
Yeah.
What do they want? What do they expect out of musicians? Like Pittsburgh is a big sports town. Okay, big. I'm a big Steelers fan.
Okay.
Pirates, I'm a Pirate fan too, but I'm not into hockey that much. But I am a Steelers fan. And somebody came up with about a couple of months ago we were talking about. They said, you know what? If the average jazz musician would put his name and a number on his back, he would be a millionaire.
Yeah.
You get my drift?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now let's turn the page, Gene. Let's talk about memorable meetings with musicians. You've met a lot of musicians in your travels.
Well, let's go back to Basie's around 1962, and I was appearing up there, and I used to bring the trio off on an intermission with the Milestones, which was Miles's tune, and he happened to be in the audience, and sitting there, and I went down. I had to go to the bathroom, so I went down. The men's room was downstairs, and I walked in, and I'm doing my thing, and Miles comes in, and he's at the next stall over, and he says, "Hey man, I heard you playing my stuff up there. You sound pretty good, man."
That's cool,
I said,
man.
"Thank you, Mr. Davis."
Yeah, you got the thumbs up from Miles Davis, man. That was great.
And Jimmy Smith, my idol for these years, still is my idol, I was at a place called Leo's Casino in Cleveland playing, and he was following us into Leo's the next week. So I closed on a Sunday. He was opening on a Monday. Okay, so he came in, and I have a tendency to just play with my eyes closed, And so I'm taking my solo on the tune, and I open it. He's standing right in front of the organ, like just looking at me. I said, "What?"
Jimmy Smith.
Yeah, Jimmy Smith.
Wow.
He said, "Man," he said, "you sound good, man." He said, "Yeah, keep on practicing,
That's cool.
Yeah, and then the next thing with Jimmy is we appeared together in Atlantic City at the Wonder Garden.
For real?
Wonder Garden. The way that came about, I was working through Ruth Bowen, and she booked me into a place called the Wonder Garden. And she said, "You're opening up." It was Mother's Day, the Friday before Mother's Day, and we opened up with Dizzy Gillespie, and James Moody, Kenny Byron, and Chris White, and Rudy Collins on drums. And we would do an hour, and they do an hour. And the owner liked us so much, he called Ruth. He says, "I want these guys all summer." Yeah. So that whole summer, I worked, opposite. Ramsey Lewis, Ahmad Jamal, King Curtis, Jimmy McGriff, Jack McDuff. Jack had George Benson with him and that group, I mean, that club the whole 6 days a week, it was rocking. Then I walk up the street and I see Sammy Davis and acts like that at Prop Williams at the Club Harlem, And then Bill Davis, one of my idols, he was across the street at Grace's Belmont, And that whole corner was just popping. But the next year, we did the same thing, and I had a chance to work opposite Jimmy. So the last night we were there, we had done a whole week together, and Jimmy said, "Hey man, you want to have some fun?" He was on a show. I went over, he was playing, he whispered in my, he says, get your axe, man. He's bringing it out here. So I wheeled my organ out next to his,
Is that right?
and we had the two organs going,
Whoa, man.
Another great memory about that room was, we were working opposite Art Blakey and the Jazz Messengers.
Oh, yeah?
And Art Randy started soloing, Randy Gillespie, and Art got happy. Art came up and, sat down to the drums, and he and Randy started battling. It was our hour. They were waiting for, but Art just couldn't take it. He came up and he played. He sat down, and I said, "I'm going to get a piece of this." So I started playing that blues or something, and I had two drummers behind me, Art Blaker and Randy. Oh my God, you're talking about memories.
You
man.
know what that reminds me of? I seen you at the Aurora Club. It was Joe Harris on your right,
Right.
Roger Humphreys on
right,
your left,
right,
man.
right.
And I wish I could have had a video camera back then.
Yep.
That was exciting.
Yep, it was.
That was really exciting.
Yeah.
No. You played at the Blue Note.
In New York, oh yeah.
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 What was that all like for you?
Well,
Playing that,
Jack Kreitzberg had his offices right upstairs on the second floor of the Blue Note, and he's instrumental, and they had their own label, Half Note Records, and he was instrumental getting that started. So he knew the owners and this and that, and he said, "I got this wonderful organist, let's bring Gene in and see what he does, So they gave me a Monday night, and that's what I've done. I've done about 7 of them now,
Yeah.
That's Monday is a very hard to draw in New York, but we've always done very well, and
You know why? You.
well, maybe so.
It
I would really like to
look,
think
I'm going
that.
to tell you, people love your playing.
Well, thank you.
They do. They love your playing. Now, there's 52 weeks in a year. Have you ever worked 52 weeks consecutively?
Yes. Back in the early 70s, I had to change my style because the jazz organ, as we know it, was sort of taking a back seat, and I had to change up my style of playing to go in what I call the restaurant circuit around Pittsburgh, which was very lucrative for the next 10 years. And I started with Walt Maddox, at Hospitality Motor. Me and him and another Northsider, Sylvester Gaucher.
Yeah, on drums.
On drums, right. And we stayed at that room. I started, I think, Labor Day, and we worked 2 weeks past Labor Day the next year. So that was 54 weeks.
Yeah.
I worked straight.
Yeah, because you know what? When I told Walt you was coming on, he said, ask him if he ever worked 52 weeks in a year.
Yeah.
That had to be great, man.
Yeah.
Sylvester Gaucher.
Walt's very
man.
different, yeah.
Yeah. Now look here. Leo's Casino, 1962.
Right, that's where I met Jimmy. That's
so we talked about
we
that.
talked about
okay,
that.
what
yeah.
about Atlantic City? Now you
Atlantic
did some
City,
things up in Atlantic City.
That's where me and Jimmy locked up with the 2 organs. And,
that was the 2 organs.
Yeah, and the Dizzy Gillespie thing.
Okay. Now here's the thing. You mentioned earlier the name Arthur Prysock.
Yeah.
Now when we come back, can we talk about some of your time with Mr. Prysock? Ladies and gentlemen, the one and only Mr. Gene Ludwig. Up close and personal. Ladies and gentlemen, we're here talking to the master of the Hammond B3 organ, Mr. Gene Ludwig. Gene, now you mentioned the name Arthur Prysock. What was that like working with Mr. Prysock and touring with him?
Well, it was great. The way I really met Arthur, if we can digress back to 1962, I was working with the traveling band I mentioned before with Randy Gillespie, and we worked a place called Baby Grand in Canton, Ohio. And Arthur didn't have a group then. He came in as a single. He had just recorded "I Worry About You," that with the Buddy Johnson band, and we did like a weekend together, and ever since then, he remembered me because he liked the sound of the organ. So when he started his own group with his brother Red, which was, I was a big fan of Red's back in high school with hand clapping,
Okay.
It's, he had an organist with him, and he decided he wanted to go elsewhere, to play. So Arthur said he came through Pittsburgh, and I went to see him at the Crawford Grill, and he says, do you have any eyes for traveling? I said, sure. He says, well, let me talk to, he had John Patton with him, another great jazz organist, and John decided he wanted to do other things. So he asked me if I wanted to travel, and I said, sure. So it was around Christmas time of 1973. He called me and he says, can you come to New York next week? I said, sure. So I went up to New York, and we started at the Half Note. It was right off of 7th Avenue, And I was with the band maybe over a year.
Oh.
And I wanted to come back home, I sort of got tired of traveling. I came back, and then I went out again 4 years later with him. He wanted to know if he called me and wanted to know if I could back out. I said, sure. So I went back out for another couple of years, with Arthur. And like before you asked me how the traveling situation, oh man, I got another great story, with Arthur. We played all over the world, not over the world, but all over the United States. And he'd always call anybody in the audience of any, what can I say, notoriety. He'd have them up there, and Red Fox and he worked together in the Buddy Johnson band, and Red Fox and Slappy White, no, I'm sorry, Nipsey Russell came in on our gig in Cincinnati, and he had them up there telling jokes, But I had a chance to do maybe a tune or two behind the great Nancy Wilson with Arthur. He called her up on the bandstand in New York. Barbara McNair, Johnny Hartman, Demita Joe on the West Coast, Esther Phillips, and the biggest corker he invited, they came in together with her husbands, Leslie Uggams and Dionne Warwick.
What?
And he called them up on the bandstand, at the Playboy Club in Los Angeles.
Yeah. So
they sang, I'll never forget this as long as I live, and I wish I had a picture of this. They started singing. I said, well, what do you want to sing? They said, Bye Bye Blackbird in the key of F. So we kicked it off, me and the drummer, and they sang, they traded. They said, okay, Gene, you have it. So I started singing, and each one of them came along and sat on the organ bench next to me, put their arms around me, while I thought, oh man. Leslie Young on one side, Dionne Warwick on the other.
Right.
Yeah. Could you imagine that? Just,
man, great moments.
Oh man, tell me about it.
Well, let me ask you this now. You've accompanied quite a few vocalists and also instrumentalists in your career, correct?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Well, what do you enjoy most, accompanying someone or doing your own? When you're doing
I get a kick out of what I call shading. That's backing somebody up,
Yeah.
And, I get a kick out because it's I don't know. It's sort of diversified as far as getting across to an audience. I have a tendency to, play and say, I wonder if I'm getting across, But then you bring a singer, another instrumentalist up and let them play or sing, that sort of takes the light off of you and puts it on them, and it's a little comforting, I'll tell you.
Yeah, that's great, man. I mean, just a lot of cats. I mean, because I know you're a humble guy, man. But a lot of guys they want the limelight. They want the limelight. But you enjoy being a supporting player.
Right. Exactly.
You know what I mean?
Sure.
That's a beautiful thing.
Because that takes a rare finesse to play behind somebody, and have them compliment you, say, well, you're a great accompanist,
Right. Now let me ask you this. Now, when you look back on all of this, any regrets?
Well, like I said earlier, not re-signing with Atlantic, and
Okay.
Other than that,
What about out of all of them, the most memorable moment or the most something that stands out more than all of them, or they're pretty much all on the same plateau?
Well, I don't know. This day and age, at my today, you know, I look at myself and I think there's a memorable moment that I'm here. You know,
Okay.
being able to sit down and still play. You know, after all these years, you know, and still swing. Mm-hmm. That's memorable to me. You know, like
Okay.
that's success to me.
Yeah. Now, is there anything that you have not done yet that you would like to do?
I don't know. I've always admired a baritone saxophone player, and I was going to buy a Barry years ago and
Is
take
that
some
right?
lessons on it, you know, because it's like the organ. It's a very deep instrument, man. I like the deeper the music as far as sound goes, the better, you know, because that's a lot of my feeling that I get comes from a bass line, you know, and
Okay.
I create a bass line, you know, whether it's a funk line or like a 4/4 mainstream, you know, that's where you get a bass line going and get the drummer with a hi-hat.
Yeah.
That's your foundation.
Right.
That's your foundation. Everything builds on that.
Yeah.
You know?
All good buildings need a good foundation.
That's right.
That's
That's
great.
right.
Well, I tell you what, man, I really enjoyed talking to you.
Well, thank you.
I thank you so much for coming on. And also, I thank your lovely wife, Patty, man.
Me too.
She is the best.
Yes, she is. Yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, keep your ears and your eyes open because Mr. Gene Ludwig is still bringing it to you live in living color in 3D. Till next time, take care. Goodbye.